The kitchen smelled like buttered carrots and baby lotion. His little head, damp from the bath, rested right in the crook of my arm. I rocked him gently, humming something I didn't even realize I still remembered. His breath warmed the side of my neck, soft and even, like a secret only he could tell. The fridge hummed behind me, and the toy he'd been chewing on earlier spun lazily on the floor, clicking every now and then. I closed my eyes and breathed in deep. For a moment, there was nothing but peace, the kind that lives in the small places, the quiet ones. Then I heard it. "She acts like our maid," she said, her voice low but not low enough. It came from down the hall, through the phone, but it reached me like it had been said into my ear. My arms didn't move, I didn't flinch. The baby shifted slightly, and I tucked him in tighter, as if shielding him from something he couldn't name. The smell of the carrots turned too sweet all of a sudden. Too much. I stared at the wall across from me like it could tell me what to do, and for the first time in years, it didn't answer. I kissed his forehead like nothing had happened. The softness of his skin, warm and innocent, grounded me in a way I didn't know I needed. From the other room, dishes clinked gently as she set the table, the kind of noise that usually felt like home. But now every sound in that house had turned unfamiliar. I smiled, tight, practiced. My lips stretched but never reached my heart. "She acts like our maid," she'd said, not a thank you, not a quiet nod of appreciation. Just that. I've been many things in this life. I've held people through sickness, folded their clothes, rocked them to sleep, kept my opinion soft so others could rest easy. But at that moment, her words clung to my ribs like wet linen. Still, I said nothing. You learn how to hold silence in your bones when you've mothered long enough. You wear it like an extra layer under your skin, tight, invisible, but always there. I looked down at the baby, at the way he trusted me without needing proof, and I held my breath and smiled again. The table was full. Food is hot, laughter scattered, light and loose. I stood there just beyond the chair I was never asked to sit in. I poured the water, refilled the bowls, wiped the edge of the casserole dish with a towel. No one stopped me. No one offered. The word "maid" buzzed in my ears like a fly I couldn't swat, but I didn't show it. I kept scooping, passing, refilling. Not because I was being kind, but because I didn't know where else to put my hands. My plate sat at the corner of the table, full and untouched. The garlic filled the air, thick and heavy. Too much, like everything else in that room. I reached for my glass of water but didn't drink. It was already warm. I watched them chew, laugh, pass the butter. I could have been wallpaper. I felt like a ghost in a house I once built. It wasn't the labor that hurt. It wasn't even the lack of thanks. It was the erasure, the way love, once familiar, had turned into service without soul. And I swallowed that feeling whole, because there wasn't room for it at that table. I stood near the back door, hand resting on the knob. Outside, the porch light flickered. The breeze nudged the door like it was inviting me to step through. I stayed still. The sounds of their conversation blurred behind me, soft, distant. The smell of rain lingered in the air, faint and earthy. It made me think of spring when I was a girl, before I knew what it meant to be tired in your bones. I stared out into the dark, heart still, mind racing. Part of me wanted to stay, to keep the peace, to avoid the questions. But something in me was stirring. Not rage, not even hurt anymore. Just clarity. The kind that settles low in your belly and tells you, this is not where you grow. My fingers tightened on the knob. I didn't know where I'd go yet. But I knew I couldn't stay. Sometimes it isn't the storm that pushes you out. It's the quiet before it, and the way it makes you feel like you don't belong in your own story anymore. I didn't slam the door, didn't say goodbye. I just slipped. Out with my keys and my silence. The gate clicked behind me, soft, final. The gravel crunched under my steps as I walked slowly to my car. It was quiet out there. Cleaner, somehow. Like the air hadn't been breathed yet. Stars blinked down from the navy blue sky, not watching, not judging, just there. A dog barked somewhere down the street, far off and tired. I inhaled deeply, felt the cool air settle in, my lungs like a fresh start. I wasn't walking away from them. I was walking back toward myself, toward the woman who used to laugh louder, who once had dreams big enough to build a life from. It didn't feel like leaving. It felt like remembering. And that memory was enough to carry me home. I paused at the edge of the hallway, eyes on the half-open door. The room was quiet, filled, with the low hum of white noise. He lay in the crib, one chubby hand curled beneath his cheek, the other twitching gently in sleep. The mobile spun slowly above him, casting soft shadows across the wall. Milk and powder still hung faintly in the air. I stepped in without a sound. My hand hovered above him. I brushed a finger gently across his cheek. His skin was warm. I didn't speak, but inside I whispered, "You won't remember this, but I will." I wanted to lift him, to hold him one more time, but I didn't, because leaving him asleep meant loving him more than I needed to be held back. Leaving wasn't the hard part. It was choosing not to wake the one soul who still saw me, as I was, whole, enough, beloved. I turned slowly and left the room with tears that didn't fall, but didn't need to. The dough used to fight back, you know. It pushed against my hands like it had its own will, stubborn and full of life. But I liked that. I liked the stretch and pull, the heat of the kitchen pressing against my skin like sunlight through old glass. My back would ache by mid-afternoon. The Pittsburgh heat didn't help, not with those old cracked windows barely letting in a breeze. But I never complained. I'd wipe the sweat off my brow with the back of my hand, adjust my apron that was always stained with flour and something sweet, and keep going. People see me now and think softness. They see gray hair, a quiet voice, and think I've always been this way. But these hands, they've known real work, real weight. They've built things, held things together when everything else was falling apart. I used to stand at that wooden counter, white with flour like a dusting of snow, and listen to the radio talk about the strike. I'd knead and knead while it buzzed in the background, hope rising in the oven, even when everything else felt cold. Those were strong hands, still are, in their own way. The sky was gray the morning I did it, low clouds, heavy like they were holding something back. I walked down the street with my coat wrapped tight, not for the cold, but for the weight of the decision in my chest. The pawn shop bell jingled when I opened the door. That sound, sharp and lonely, still echoes in me sometimes. The man behind. The counter looked up, bored, until he saw what I took from my pocket. "My wedding ring," I said quietly. He didn't ask why. He didn't have to. The shelves at home were empty, the strike dragging on longer than anyone expected, and I had mouths to feed, not just my own. He held it up to the light, weighed it in his palm like it wasn't full of memories. It clinked on the counter when he set it down, a clean, final sound. I walked out with a small envelope of bills and a receipt that didn't feel like enough. But it was enough for flour, for sugar, for 20 pounds of what I needed most. Hope. Hope I could mix with my hands, bake into something warm, and offer to people with nothing left. We didn't have a bakery sign or uniforms, just a borrowed oven in a borrowed back room and more faith than reason. But that was enough. We started before dawn. I remember the sound of those tin pans, clatter, clang, laughter underneath it all, like a heartbeat. I hadn't heard women laugh like that in weeks, not since the layoffs, not since the fear crept in like winter wind. under a door. But in that kitchen, something shifted. The scent of cinnamon, the rising dough, it filled the cracks in us. We weren't just baking. We were building something that didn't need permission to exist. Loaves lined up like little soldiers on the counter. One of the girls, her name was Mary, I think, said, "These look too good to give away." But she smiled when she said it. First time I'd seen her smile since her husband lost his job. We handed out bread to whoever needed it. No questions. Just warmth. That kitchen did more than feed stomachs. It fed hearts. And maybe it didn't last forever. But for a while, it felt like everything good in the world was coming from that glowing oven. They never called me the leader. But they always waited for me to unlock the door. Late nights, we'd sit around the table with chipped mugs of coffee gone bitter. We'd scribble down schedules on the backs of old flyers, pin recipes to the fridge with magnets shaped like fruit. Most of the women had tired feet, shoulders that sagged from more than just work. But they kept showing up, because something about that place made them feel useful again. I never gave speeches, didn't have to. I just kept showing up, kept listening, kept baking. And they followed, not because I was loud, but because I was steady. Sometimes I catch myself staring into the teacup long after the tea's gone cold. Tonight was one of those nights. Chamomile still clung to the air, soft and grassy. The photo album sat open on the table, pages worn at the corners. There I was, 22, apron dusted in flour, grinning like I owned the world. Maybe I did back then. That phone call, the one where she called me the Maid, it did more than hurt. It pulled something old awake in me, a voice I hadn't heard in years, a fire I thought had gone out with the closed bakery doors. But it's still there, the girl who sold her ring to buy flour, who rose before the sun to bake for strangers and stood tall without needing a title. She's not gone. She just got quiet. And now, maybe, it's time she stood up again. I stood on the porch with the casserole in one hand, the rolls tucked in a dish towel pressed to my chest. The porch light blinked overhead, casting a yellow glow. On the chipped welcome mat, I knocked gently, just once, like always, not too loud. Not like I was expecting a parade. The door opened halfway, and my son gave a tired smile. "Smells good, Ma," he said, stepping aside. I forced a smile back. Inside, the television buzzed low from the living room. A football game, I think. I followed the scent of roasted rosemary and chicken, hoping it would do what words couldn't. I set the food down on the counter and opened the foil just a bit to let the steam out. The green beans were still warm, the casserole golden at the edges. No one said much. I looked around their kitchen, the family photos that didn't include me anymore, the refrigerator covered in magnets I hadn't bought. And suddenly, I felt like a stranger, like I'd wandered into someone else's house by mistake. I'd brought dinner, but not for comfort, not for company. I'd brought it in hope, and that hope already felt misplaced. The food was served, but the silence served more. My grandson's giggles filled the air now and then, messy and sweet. He smeared a bit of roll across his cheek, and I smiled without meaning to. Across the table, my son and his wife passed dishes with quick glances and tight lips. No one looked at me. Not really. The green beans sat untouched beside my knife. I poked at them, too aware of the ticking clock on the wall, each second louder than it should have been. Then, casually, almost like it meant nothing, he said it. "Mom, maybe you've overstayed." He didn't even look up when he said it. He was buttering a roll. I blinked once, set down my fork. It didn't feel like a slap. No, it felt more like the air being pulled out of the room, slow and steady, like a balloon going quiet in your hands. Didn't argue. I just sat there, letting the silence swell back up around us. My heart didn't shatter. It folded. Folded in on itself like a sweater too tight for its drawer. And I realized I wasn't at dinner. I was at the end of something I hadn't seen coming. I turned to him slowly, watching his jaw move as he chewed, as if nothing had happened. I searched his face for something, some flicker of the boy I'd raised, the one who used to cry into my neck when he was scared, the one who called me his best friend when he was 7. But his eyes didn't meet mine. They stayed low, distant, fixed on the plate like he couldn't bear to see me anymore, and what hurt the most wasn't the words. It was how easy they came, how his face didn't change, how nothing in him paused to wonder what he'd just broken. He looked tired, or maybe just done, and in that moment I knew. He'd already closed the door long before I knocked tonight. I placed my napkin down, slow and quiet, like it mattered. I reached for my purse and looped it over my arm the same way I did when he was little, and we'd leave church early if he got fussy. I didn't look at her. I didn't speak to him. I stood carefully, like my body was glass, and I could hear it, creaking. My heels clicked down the hallway, the coat rack watching like an old friend who couldn't interfere. I paused at the door, adjusted my scarf. The scent of my own perfume rose gently, a familiar comfort even in the dim light. The wind nudged the window pane, tapping as if it wanted to come inside and carry me out. I opened the door without a word. No slam, no sigh, and I walked into the night with my back straight and my heart still beating. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is leave before they ask. The casserole sat on the passenger seat, still warm, the scent of rosemary and chicken, filling the car like a memory I didn't want. The radio played, something soft, maybe a love song, but I wasn't really listening. My hands stayed steady on the wheel, but inside, it was noisy. My heart thudded like footsteps behind me, not fast, just firm, like something chasing me without needing to run. The pavement shimmered beneath the headlights. A fresh rain, maybe. Or maybe just the way grief looks when it lays itself out flat. I passed the grocery store we used to walk to together. The stop sign where he used to yell, "Red means stop," from the back seat. Funny how a 10-minute drive can stretch wide enough to carry every version of you that ever loved someone. I didn't cry. Not yet. But the tears waited quietly at the corners, like guests unsure if they were welcome, and I gripped the steering wheel just a little tighter. 10 minutes. That's all it took to go from a mother to a memory. The pie sat warm in my lap, wrapped in a faded dish towel that still carried the scent of cinnamon and years of family meals. Pumpkin, just like every year, just the way he used to like it. I told myself I'd smile today, keep the peace, let things slide. I stepped into their house, the sunlight slanting across the rug like gold ribbons. No one took my coat. The rack was full anyway, coats newer, brighter, not mine. The smell hit first, overcooked onions, cheap wine, something too sour trying to be sweet. Jazz floated from the kitchen, trying to sound fancy, but it was no match for the TV blaring. Sports from the living room. She called out a quick hello, no eye contact. He nodded, barely glancing up. I set the pie on the counter like I was placing an offering at a shrine I no longer belonged to. I looked around at the space that used to hold laughter. It was all the same, and completely different, something colder. Then autumn air moved through the house, tucked behind every smile, every polite nod. I smoothed my dress and told myself again, just smile. Just get through it. Even if no one said it out loud, I wasn't welcome here. He came charging through the living room like a freight train in socks, arms flung wide, gravy already smeared down his sleeve. "Grandma!" he shouted, and that one word cracked me wide open. I bent down to catch him as he collided with my legs, nearly knocking the breath out of me. "There's my sweet boy," I whispered into his curls, holding him close, letting the noise around us fade into nothing. For a moment, everything in the room softened. The television, the clinking forks, the distance between adults. None of it mattered. Just him, his heartbeat against mine, his little fingers gripping the edge of my sweater like it was his lifeline. "I saved you a seat," he said proudly, pointing to the spot beside him on the couch, sticky with jelly. And for one breath, one blink, I let myself believe I belonged. I held on to that moment like a folded letter in my coat pocket. Something I could take with me when the day got too loud. They handed me the carving knife like it was a novelty, a performance. I'd carved turkeys since my son had baby teeth, but now it felt like I was on a stage I hadn't auditioned for. Everyone watched, or maybe pretended not to, which sometimes feels worse. She stood near the wine glasses, arms crossed, and when I picked up the knife I caught it, just a flick of her eyes, a roll, so quick but sharp. I steadied the bird with one hand and slid the knife through with the other. The meat separated clean, just like it always had, but nothing about it felt familiar anymore. Every slice felt like a test I hadn't studied for. Mom still does it. The old way, my son chuckled, and I smiled at the table like it didn't land wrong. I passed plates, one by one. Hers too. I didn't shake. I didn't sign. I just kept slicing. Because sometimes dignity isn't loud. It's quiet, measured, like a blade moving through turkey breast, while everyone pretends the room isn't colder than the stuffing. The room buzzed with forks and second helpings. Gravy smeared plates. Laughter bounced too loud, and I just sat, watching it all like a guest at a play I hadn't been cast in. Then, in that sweet, clear voice only a child can have, my grandson turned to me and asked, "Grandma, are you staying forever?" My heart swelled at first, ready to say something kind, something that would make him feel loved, safe. But before I could answer, she said it. God, I hope not. Quiet. Just a whisper, but sharp enough to stop the air in my chest. No one reacted. No gasp, no correction. Just the rustle of napkins and the scrape of a chair leg. I looked at my plate, at the mashed potatoes cooling too fast, picked up my fork like nothing had happened, but every bite after that tasted like chalk. Like something spoiled. I didn't speak. I didn't look at her. I just nodded, like I hadn't heard, but I had, and now I couldn't unhear it. They were arguing about pie, pumpkin or pecan, when I stepped quietly into the hallway. I didn't say a word, didn't need to. Their voices faded as I walked, my fingers grazing the edge of the console table. There, tucked between a stack of mail and a half-burned candle, sat a photo. Me and my grandson. He was just a baby, nestled in my arms, gummy smile wide open. I was laughing. I remembered that moment. He had sneezed right after, and I'd called it the happiest mess I'd ever cleaned. I picked up the frame, cool and weighty in my hands. My reflection blinked back at me from the glass, older, quieter, but still me. I didn't take it out of spite. I took it because I needed to carry something home that proved I'd mattered here. That once I was part of something real. Their voices grew louder behind me, fake laughs and forks tapping against dessert plates. I slipped the frame into my bag, soft and slow. My footsteps barely made a sound on the hardwood. But inside, something echoed. And this time, it wasn't empty. The morning air had that clean bite to it, the kind that stings your cheeks just enough to remind you you're alive. I pulled my scarf tighter as the breeze tugged at its ends and walked past baskets of butternut squash, sunflowers bundled with twine, and glass jars of jam that caught the light like stained glass windows in a church. I only meant to get apples. Nothing else. No lingering, no chit-chat, just in and out. The crowd moved around me, laughing, calling out prices, children dragging their parents toward cinnamon donuts. And me? I felt like a ghost, floating between stands, my shoes quiet on. The gravel. I reached for a Honeycrisp apple and turned it over in my hand. That's when I heard it. Margaret? The name landed soft, like a blanket being unfolded. I turned, not quite ready for whatever memory waited on the other end of that voice. She smiled, gentle and surprised, like she'd just found something she thought she'd lost. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. I wasn't invisible anymore. She held a crate of pears, her sweater dotted with flour like she'd rushed from her own kitchen. She was maybe in her 50s, lines around her eyes that looked like they came from smiling too often. "You're the scone lady, aren't you?" she asked, like it was a title that still meant something. I blinked. That name, I hadn't heard it in years, decades even. "You used to bake at the union rallies," she said, her voice trembling just a little. "Your lemon poppy seed ones were my favorite. You kept people going." I smiled, but my throat tightened. My fingers curled around the handle of my basket to keep them from shaking. "That was a long time ago," I said softly. She stepped forward, gently rested her hand on mine. It mattered. And just like that, the noise of the market faded. For a moment, I wasn't a woman picking apples. I was someone remembered, someone seen, and something warm bloomed in my chest, aching and alive. I wandered the rest of the stalls with her words tucked in my pocket like a note I didn't want to lose. My name had made someone smile, not out of pity, out of memory. She didn't know the things they called me now. She knew the woman who baked for strangers, the one who made warmth with her hands. At the honey stand, I paused. Bees buzzed lazily nearby. A baby laughed 2 stalls over, high and pure. I slipped my sunglasses down just a little, just enough to let the tears fall quietly, not from sadness. Not exactly. It was something deeper than that, like being handed back a piece of yourself you thought the world had forgotten. The clipboard sat on a folding table, weighed down by a chipped coffee mug and a flyer for lavender soap. The sign-up sheet fluttered at the edges, names scribbled in hopeful handwriting, bakers, jam makers, candle crafters. I stood there for a long while. My hand hovered above the pen, heart thudding soft but sure. I didn't know what I'd bake. Didn't know how much or whether anyone would care, but I knew I had to write it. I signed my name with slow, careful strokes. Margaret Whitlow. The letters looked unfamiliar, but steady. The way a voice sounds when you finally speak after a long silence. A breeze lifted my scarf, the air scented with rosemary and lemons from a nearby booth. Birds chirped from somewhere beyond the parking lot, cheerful and unbothered. I set the pen down and stepped back, and for the first time in years, I felt the flicker of something I'd thought had gone out. It hadn't. It was still there, waiting. Set the apples down on the counter one by one, their skins glowing red and gold in the late afternoon light. The house was quiet except for the soft whistle of the kettle warming on the stove. I should have been tired, but something stirred in me. I unpacked each apple slowly, like they were small treasures. Symbols. Proof that I had gone looking for. Fruit, but came home with something else entirely. A hunger. Not for food, but for purpose, for creation, for feeling like myself again. I reached into the high cabinet and pulled out my old recipe box, covered in a fine coat of dust. I opened the lid gently. The cards were still there, smudged with oil, marked with notes in my younger handwriting. They smelled faintly of cinnamon, even now, and I knew it was time to bake again. The key turned with a soft click, and the door creaked open like it had been waiting for me. Morning light spilled across the floor, catching on the freshly mopped tiles and the 2 wide windows still smudged from yesterday's cleaning. It was small, just a corner unit with a flickering neon open sign and white curtains tied back, with bits of twine. But to me, it felt like a cathedral. The air held that newness, vanilla primer, wood polish, a hint of fresh bread from the sample batch I'd baked at dawn. I stepped inside slowly, letting the silence settle around me. It wasn't empty. It was full of breath, of promise. I stood there a while, hands at my sides, apron folded under one arm, not saying a word. This was mine. Every shelf, every counter, every tin of flour in the back, I had placed it all. With my own hands. After everything I'd lost, everything I'd been called, I had built something again, not to prove a point, not to be seen, but because I still could. The breeze fluttered the curtain, and I smiled. It didn't need to be big, to be beautiful. It just needed to be mine. I didn't reach for the recipe card. I didn't have to. My fingers already knew the way. How much flour to scoop, when to stop pouring the milk, how long to let the dough sit before folding it over itself like a secret. The kitchen was warm, the oven humming low, like it remembered. Me too. The smell of butter and brown sugar wrapped around me like a soft shawl. The bowls clinked together the way they always had. Familiar music. My hands moved without thought, muscle memory shaped by years of love and repetition. Old gospel played from the radio, crackling faintly beneath the sound of spoons tapping and flour whispering onto the countertop. When the first tray came out, golden and sweet, I stood back and just breathed it in. "You still know how," I whispered, not to the bread, but to myself, because it's easy to forget, but even easier to remember when it smells like cinnamon and home. She looked maybe 20, maybe younger, eyes tired, hair pulled back into a messy knot. A baby sat heavy on her hip, fussing, tugging at the string of her jacket. "Are you hiring?" she asked, voice small but steady. I looked at her. Really looked. I knew that kind of hope. The kind that's stitched right beside hunger. The kind that shows up anyway, hands empty, heart full. I reached behind the counter and pulled out an apron. "We lift each other here," I said, handing it to her. She blinked like she didn't quite believe it, then smiled, shaky but sure. The "A" baby cooed as she filled out the form, her hand trembling just a little before it steadied. I turned back to the kitchen and poured us both some coffee. The bell over the door rang, sharp and unexpected. I wiped my hands on my apron, still warm from the last batch of lemon poppy seed muffins, and turned. He stood there. My son, older, tired, not angry, just unsure. His eyes scanned the shop, slow and quiet, like he was trying to piece together how it all happened without him. I didn't say anything. Just held his gaze. He looked smaller in that moment. Or maybe I just wasn't shrinking anymore. I reached behind the counter, picked up a muffin, and walked it to him. "Still warm," I said. He took it. Didn't speak, but his fingers lingered. Around the paper wrapper like he didn't quite want to let go. And in the silence that stretched between us, something softer passed. Not forgiveness, maybe. But something like it. He looked around like he was waiting to be impressed, or maybe waiting for me to need him. But I didn't. I watched him glance at the sign, the racks of bread, the little tip jar with folded thank you notes. And I realized, then, I wasn't waiting for praise. I wasn't hoping for pride or validation. This shop, this space, it wasn't built to earn anyone's approval. It was mine, for me, for the girl who sold her wedding ring, for the woman who never stopped rising. I stood a little straighter as he turned toward the door. He left without a word, and I didn't shrink, not even a little. The bell above the door chimed, still swaying when she walked in, brisk, polished, heels clicking too loud against the tile. She didn't even glance around, just marched straight toward the counter like she owned the moment. "I'm here to speak with the owner," she said, phone still in hand, breath just a little too short. I stood there, hands dusted in flour, apron tied at my waist, name stitched in neat blue thread over my chest. She didn't look at me, not really. Her eyes skimmed right past, landing on the racks of bread, the chalkboard menu, anything but me. Until I stepped out from behind the counter and turned fully. Our eyes met, and just like that, her entire face froze. Shoulders pulled back slightly, Mouth parted, but no words came. I didn't say a thing. I didn't need to. We stood in that moment, surrounded by the scent of honey buns rising in the oven, the sunlight painting golden shapes on the wall. She was the only one surprised. Her voice dropped. "You run this place?" I nodded once, calm, steady. "You?" she whispered again, like saying it louder might make it less true. The counter between us stretched wide in that silence, a boundary and a bridge. The room smelled like cinnamon and butter, warm and full. Her perfume, sharp, expensive, didn't quite belong here. It curled around the edges like something trying too hard to stay in control. I smiled, not smug, not sharp, just soft, solid. Like a mountain watching the wind blow through trees, knowing it would still be standing long after the gusts had passed. She didn't smile back. I turned to the coffee pot and poured her a cup, black, the way I remembered she liked it. The espresso machine hummed in the background. The spoon clinked gently as I stirred in nothing. I carried it to her and slid it across the counter with both hands. Steady, warm. She stared at the steam rising from the cup like it might tell her what to do next. I didn't mention the past. Didn't ask if she remembered what she'd once called me. Kindness can be heavier than anger, especially when it comes from someone you once tried to forget. And I could feel her start to shift beneath its weight. We sat at the corner booth, the one near the window where the sun always found its way in. She held the coffee but didn't drink it. Her fingers curled around the mug like it was the only thing anchoring her. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she said softly. I need something. I need work." Her eyes met mine, wide open now. Not proud, not broken either. Just raw. "I don't want a favor. I need hours, a place to be useful." And I understood. Not from sympathy, but from memory. Because I knew that feeling, that thin line between need and dignity. I'd walked it barefoot once, holding my breath the whole way. Steam rose from her cup in slow curls. The scent of baked apples drifted through the air from the racks behind us. I nodded slowly. She didn't say thank you, not yet. But her shoulders eased just a bit. I handed her the folded apron and the schedule. She looked down at them like they might disappear if she blinked. She didn't thank me, not at first. Just held them gently, like they meant more than she could say. Her eyes shimmered, but her chin stayed high. I saw pride still standing there alongside the softness. Not arrogance, just a quiet kind of strength. And that was enough. I didn't need an apology. The moment didn't ask for one. The universe had already done its part, bringing her here to this shop, apron in hand. Sometimes the best kind of revenge isn't loud. It doesn't call names. It's quiet. It's building something so strong, so rooted in purpose, that the very people who once dismissed you have to walk through your door to survive. I smiled as she turned away, apron tucked under her arm, and, for a long moment, the bakery held its breath. Warm light across the flour-dusted shelves, the scent of rising loaves filling every quiet corner. The bell above the bakery door gave its usual soft chime, and I looked up from the register, expecting a regular. It was him, taller than I remembered, shoulders wider. His hair was shorter, darker maybe, and his voice, when he said, "Hi, Grandma," had dropped several notes since the last time I'd heard it. But his eyes, they were still his. Still carried that flicker of the boy who once crawled into my lap during thunderstorms and called me his safe place. He stood there in the doorway, not stepping in all the way, just shifting his weight, his sneakers scuffing softly on the tile like he didn't know if he was welcome. The sun slid across the tops of the bread loaves behind me, bathing the shop in a warm hush. The air smelled faintly of sugar and yeast. No one else was inside, just us. "Hey, he said again, voice catching a little. I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded. Hey, sweetheart. He stepped forward slowly, carrying something much heavier than time, and I braced myself, not for anger, but for something far more fragile. Hope. We sat by the window, the booth that always caught the last of the afternoon sun. The bakery had gone quiet. The only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the cooling lemon bars on the sill behind us. He kept drumming his fingers softly on the edge of the table, eyes flicking between me and the floor. Finally, he asked for it. Why don't you come around anymore? His voice wasn't accusing. It was careful, like he'd practiced it a dozen times and still wasn't sure he'd said it right. I took a breath. I never really left, I said. I just made space, where there wasn't any offered. He looked down, nodded slowly, like each word was a piece he hadn't realized was missing from the puzzle. I didn't want to hurt him. I just wanted him to understand. Some absences aren't about walking away. Sometimes they're about making room where love used to live. He sat quiet for a minute, then started talking. She said you were moody, bitter, that you always tried to make things about you. I listened, let the words sit between us like bruised fruit. I didn't flinch. When he finished, I asked, softly, "But what did I show you?" He looked at me then, really looked, and his face changed. He dropped his gaze, cheeks pink with something close to shame. Because the truth, I think, has always been gentler than the lies. I reached beneath the counter and pulled out the old scrapbook, dusty at the edges, its spine worn from years of opening and closing, like a heart that never stopped trying. Here, I said. Take a look. We sat in the little back office, just the two of us, and the warm glow of the lamp. The room smelled of vanilla and old paper. He opened the cover carefully, his fingers trembling. Photos, handwritten birthday cards, crayon drawings, one napkin with a note in my handwriting. Don't forget, you are loved. Did I give you this? He whispered, touching the pressed flower taped beside it. You did, I said. You were 5. It came from the neighbor's garden. He smiled, barely. I don't remember this. That's okay, I said gently. I remembered it. Enough for both of us. He turned another page, and I watched the boy in him rise again, not all at once, but enough to recognize. He glanced at the clock, then down at the to-go bag I'd packed for him. Muffins, a few slices of banana bread, a note tucked inside he wouldn't find until later. I should go, he said, but didn't move. He just stayed there, his elbow brushing mine ever so slightly, not quite touching, but closer than before. I'm glad you came, I said softly. He nodded, looked out the window where dusk was beginning to settle over the street. The bakery lights cast a golden glow around us, holding everything in a kind of peace. I don't know how often I'll be able to stop by, he added. I'm not asking often, I said. Just know, the door's always open, no locks, no slammed doors, just light. He smiled, small, real. Then he stood, taking the bag with him. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to, because sometimes the closeness you need isn't in a hug. It's in the space you leave open, and the trust that someone will return to it. The invitation never came. Not by text, not in the mail, not even through one of those awkward forwarded messages. But I brought a pie anyway, apple with a crumble top. Still warm when I arrived, wrapped in a cloth that smelled like cinnamon and old memories. The dining room was already set. Forks gleamed against linen napkins, wine glasses catching the warm light from the chandelier. One too many forks, one too few welcomes. I placed the pie on the sideboard without a word. No one rushed to greet me. A few stiff nods, a few glances exchanged behind wine rims. I chose a chair at the very edge of the table, not to make a scene, just to make a point. I still belonged. Whether they liked it or not, I had history in this room, stories that helped. Build it, laughter that once filled it, hands that had cooked for it. The scent of rosemary and roasted lamb floated thick in the air, wrapping around all of us. It was a beautiful table, but beneath it, tension simmered, quiet, steady, uninvited like me. Still, I folded my napkin, straightened my back, and smiled softly. Sometimes presence is a louder statement than words. The breadbasket passed from hand to hand, jokes flying like crumbs across the tablecloth. They laughed easily, about work, the neighbors, the way the dog had knocked over a plant. Their laughter rang light and loud, but none of it touched me. It skipped over my shoulders like rain on a porch roof. I smiled where I was supposed to, nodded when someone half looked my way. I passed the gravy without being asked, heard a story about someone's promotion, nodded again. But it was like watching a play through frosted glass, close, but always one layer away. They didn't look at me when they laughed, and I realized, sitting there beneath flickering candles and the scent of garlic bread, that I'd spent too many years shrinking to fit into their quiet. Something inside me began to stand up, not with anger, with clarity. I wasn't here to keep swallowing pride just to keep the peace. I'd worn silence like armor, but now it feels heavy, unnecessary. So I sat taller, straighter, still polite, still gentle, but no longer invisible. I placed my fork down gently, letting the soft clink settle into the room before I spoke. I've sat at this table for years, I began. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I've passed every bowl, poured every glass, smiled through every comment. The air shifted, tightened. The fire crackled low behind me, the kind of sound you only notice when the room goes quiet. I just want to say this once, I continued. I felt pushed out, looked over, like a picture someone keeps on a shelf but doesn't see anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I love this family, that hasn't changed. But I can't keep pretending I don't notice how small I'm expected to be. A fork was set down on the other side of the table, soft, startled. No one rushed to interrupt me. I could feel the silence ask me to fill it with kindness, to take it back. But I didn't. I let the truth hang there, honest and quiet. And for once, that was enough. He looked down, his thumb tracing the edge of his napkin. My son, who used to run to me with scraped knees and stories too big for his mouth. Now, he couldn't see my eyes, but she did. My daughter-in-law. She looked straight at me, eyes glossy, guarded, but open. She didn't speak, just holding my gaze like it hurt to keep it, but meant something not to look away. And then she nodded. Barely. It wasn't a grand gesture, no apology, not agreement, but it was something else. Recognition, like a door cracked open in a room that had long been sealed. And in that small space, I felt the light shift just enough to matter. I stood before the pie was cut. No speech. No sigh. Just one quiet motion, my hand gathering my coat, fingers brushing the collar I'd pressed that morning in case they looked my way. They didn't ask where I was going, and I didn't explain. The scent of cinnamon trailed behind me, warm and stubborn. I slipped one arm through my coat, then the other, lifted my chin, walked toward the door with steps that didn't hurry. Outside, the evening had settled into darkness. The windows reflected only the room inside, still full, still flickering. The front door clicked shut behind me. Soft, certain. And I walked away, not with anger, but with peace tucked deep into my pocket, right beside my dignity. Every Sunday morning, I tie on my apron, the same one I wore the first day I opened the shop. The strings are a little worn now, the fabric faded at the edges, but it still fits like purpose. The kitchen is quiet, just the way I like it. Pale sunlight slips through the lace curtains, painting soft patterns on the tiled floor. The coffee, Percolates slowly and steady, filling the air with warmth even before the oven does. I knead the dough with hands that know the rhythm by heart. No measuring cups today, just memory, just trust. The scent of butter and yeast rises around me, curling into the corners of the room like comfort. A gospel tune hums low from the old radio in the corner. I don't even notice when I start humming along. I don't bake to impress anyone anymore. I bake to remember. Because love, once given, doesn't vanish. It lives in the folds of dough, in the rise of soft rolls, in the quiet rituals that steady the soul. This is mine, my peace, my beginning and my belonging. And as the kitchen fills with warmth, I know I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. I flick the porch light on each evening, just as the sun disappears behind the trees. I don't expect anyone to knock. I don't even wait, but I keep that light glowing all the same. It's not for them, it's for me. A reminder that grace doesn't wait on permission, that forgiveness isn't something loud or earned, it's something lit quietly, day after day, even when the road stays empty. The rocking chair creaks beneath me, still warm from the day. Cicadas hum in the trees. The air is calm, unhurried. That glow spilling across the worn welcome mat isn't hope. It's a choice to stay soft, to stay open, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply leave the light on. It came tucked between bills and a coupon for lawn fertilizer, a plain white envelope with my name written in blocky, uneven letters. I opened it with careful fingers, already bracing for something generic. But inside, a card. Bright blue. Crooked handwriting and a tiny star sticker on the corner. Happy birthday, Grandma. I love you. 10 words, just 10. But they filled the kitchen like a song, like church bells. I sat down at the table, the late afternoon sun casting gold stripes across the wood. The scent of lilacs from the window box drifted in, sweet and soft. I pressed the card to my chest and let my hand rest there. No tears, just quiet, just breathe. In that moment, I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't an afterthought. I was seen, and the stillness in the room felt holy. It was a Tuesday. No clouds, no noise. Just a regular morning with sunlight across the sink, and a sponge in my hand. I was washing dishes, the same ones I've scrubbed 1,000 times, and somewhere between the plates and the glasses, it hit me. I didn't want to carry it anymore. The names, the silence, the way they made me feel small. I didn't want to wear their cruelty like a coat I hadn't chosen. So I let it go. Just like that. No ceremony, no dramatic music, just a breath. And the quiet decision to forgive. Not because they earned it, because I deserved peace. The birds outside sang softly. The scent of lavender soap filled the air. Water ran over my hands, warm and gentle. And something in me loosened. Forgiveness, I've learned, doesn't need witnesses, just water, light, and a heart ready to be whole. They once called me the Maid, said it like I was the help, like I was something that clung to the edge of their lives, useful, quiet, forgettable. But now I see it clear, I wasn't the background. I was the foundation. I held the house upright when they forgot how to say thank you. I packed lunches, paid bills, showed up with casseroles and comfort. I loved them through their sharp words and long silences, and I stayed kind. That doesn't make me weak. That makes me the matriarch. I stand at the kitchen window, twilight brushing the sky in shades of rose and blue. The scent of pie cooling behind me wraps the room in warmth. The wind lifts the curtain gently, like a hand on my shoulder. I breathe in the peace I've built, and I finally call myself what I've always been. Whole. If you've ever been called. A name that didn't fit. If you've ever been overlooked or spoken over. If you've ever felt like a ghost at your own table. Please hear me. Your worth isn't handed to you. It isn't written on invitations or spoken in thank yous. It's lived. One small act of love at a time, one steady light left on, just in case someone finds their way back. So keep baking, keep rocking on that porch. Keep your voice soft but true. Someone out there still sees you, even if they don't yet know how to say thank you. If my story touched your heart, I kindly ask you to like this video and subscribe. I'll be here every day sharing more stories just for you. Thank you, my dear.